If you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to go ahead and open up to the book of Proverbs. As you are very well aware, the book of Proverbs, wise sayings, proverbial sayings, these are things that are true most of the time. And there is so much wisdom as these authors compiled these proverbial sayings that are found within these pages. We're going to begin and we're going to read a few verses this evening in chapter 1, Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 through 19. And this is where we're going to spend all of our time tonight in Proverbs 1, 8 through 19. But we're actually going to begin, before we get there, in verse 7. Because at the foundation of all of these sayings, at the foundation of all of these proverbs is verse 7. And it is very, very important that the author puts it here at the beginning. Verse 7 reads like this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." That's what this book is all about. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now verse 8. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, we will swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all our precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil," verse 16, "and they make haste to shed blood." Verse 17, "For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such," verse 19, "are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors." The path of sin, that's what you see laid out for you. In the heart of this sin in particular, this one is greed, selfish gain, greed, unjust gain. There are, as we analyze verse 8 through 19, there are four major points here that this father gives to his son for instruction. The first one that you see in verse 8, 9, and 10 is the directions that he gives. The directions that he gives. You see that in 8, 9, and 10. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." Those are the directions. Those are the directions that the father gives to his son. You see those. And it's interesting, in this particular set of directions in these three verses, what you see is the unity of the father and the mother. You see that? Have you ever, I know y'all have never done this, and I certainly have never done this. But, for instance, let's say that you want to go do something, and you go up to one parent, let's say it's your mother, and you go up to your mother and you say, "Hey, Mom, can I go do whatever it is?" Mom's response is, "No." What do? "Hey, Dad, can I go do this thing?" Well, sure. I got no problem with it. Have you ever done that? And then you go back to mom and you say, well, Dad said that I could. Have you ever done that? We would never do anything like that, would we? You see the unity in the father and the mother. You see that in verse 8? Pay attention. Don't forsake. Listen, pay heed to the instructions. Your father and your mother, although you might try to get them on different pages, your father and your mother on this instance are certainly on the same page. Listen. And it's interesting as what he says, as he describes this here, they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. You see that? A graceful garland and pendants. It's like this beautiful necklace that you wear, or this great wreath, if you will, of flowers, beautiful and ornate, a garland around your neck. Isn't that a beautiful image? Now, sometimes when we think about the directions that our parents give us, we think about them as out of date, out of touch. They don't really get it. They don't understand what's going on. And we think of them as more of a burden, don't we? And you'll tell your friends, right? Well, I can't do it because Mom and Dad won't let me, right? And it's almost like you're putting them down. But here, if you pay attention, if you follow your father and mother's instructions here, listen, it's a graceful garland. It's a beautiful thing. Mark Twain wrote, I am amazed at how much my parents have learned since I was 18. And the smart remark is, Mark Twain is wising up, isn't he? It's a graceful garland. It's not a yoke. Sometimes do we feel, when we think about our spiritual life, do we feel that what we read and what we hear is a burden? Or do we picture it? Do we picture it as a yoke tied around our necks? Or do we picture it as this beautiful garland, this ornate necklace, pendant that we carry with us? You remember, have we forgotten 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3? You remember it? God's commandments are not burdensome. Obey. And when we follow our Father, our spiritual Father, it's not a burden. It's this beautiful garland, this beautiful necklace that we wear with pride. But he also says that it's simple. You see that? My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Yeah, that's a pretty easy command, isn't it? I mean, if you take verse 10 at face value, we're all going to be okay, right? If you simply follow verse 10, sin is out the door, isn't it? All you got to do now is conquer yourself, and then you're free and clear. If sinners entice you, do not consent. It's simple, but it's hard, isn't it? And it could be hard for a multitude of reasons, but the directions that the father and the mother they give they're pretty simple. If sinners entice you, do not consent. But so are many of the commands that God gives. They're simple to comprehend, but to put in practice in the rubber meets the road setting, they become much more difficult. I mean, isn't it easy as we read in Matthew chapter 22 that Jesus is having this conversation with the lawyer? What's the greatest command? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, right? It's very simple. I mean, it's a rudimentary concept. But man, the gravity of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, Mark adds strength. That's hard, isn't it? It's hard when we live in a world where, for the sake of a better way to describe it, a world of commercials, right? Where our heart in any instant can be pulled in a multitude of directions. It's hard to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. But that's how this begins. The path of sin, it begins with these directions of when sinners entice you, when they try to lure you, do not consent. That's the simple direction that is given here in this proverb. But then you see, as you continue moving through this verse in 11 and 12, you see the decision that has to be made. Read 11 and verse 12 with me again. Here's the decision. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason, like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. Come on, man. Come with us. Come throw in your lot with us. It's going to be great. The decision has to be made, and it has to be made very quickly. It's a yes or no question. Come with us. Yeah, okay. Or no. But before you get to the decision, look at the descriptions here. What's going to happen if you say yes to this path of sin, if you start going down that way? Look at what is described here. The innocent. You see that? These people are innocent. An innocent person has done nothing wrong. They have done nothing wrong. Let that sink in. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent. Why? They're innocent. They've done nothing. And then continue, look at it again. If they say, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. There's no reason. That makes it even that much worse. It's not retaliation, it's not anger. Those you could almost understand, but here it's completely out of the blue. Let us lie in wait let us ambush these people without reason. Not only are these innocent, but they're unaware, right? They are unaware. It's an ambush. They have no idea what is coming. Completely unaware of the situation. Without reason. And what we're going to do, verse 12, like Sheol, we're going to completely swallow them. Look at this. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. Complete and utter destruction. Do you see that? Complete and utter. We are going to have no regard for them at all. Completely innocent, unaware it's going to be an ambush, and we are going to devour them. Now you got a decision to make, right? Verse 11 and verse 12, that's where the decision is. If they say, come with us, what do you do? What do you do? How do you make that decision? I don't know why these people are acting the way that they are. I don't know why sin happens and sinners do the things that they do. Perhaps in this situation, maybe they're just bored. They have no reason. Maybe you might give in to sin because you're just bored. Or maybe you might give into sin here because it's easy, right? Let us lie in wait, completely swallow these people, and we'll take everything, and then we'll send them, just leave them for dead. Send them on their way. Swallow them whole. Maybe you're thinking, hey, 5 against 1, this is going to be easy money. Sometimes we think about sin as it's just easier to do it that way. Or maybe it's 5 friends standing in front of you saying, come on, what are you afraid of? Come with us. We'll show you a good time. Watch this. You've got to make a decision. And it's always easier to make a decision about going down the path of sin before you even get to the path of sin. You follow me? Before you even hear, hey, come on, man, we're going to go fill in the blank. And if filling in the blank, whatever that is, if that is not right, you have already made up in your mind, I am not going to do that. It's a whole lot easier to say, no, I ain't doing it. I'll see you later. But in that moment, you see what it is? If sinners entice you, if they entice you, it's not a temptation if you've already made up your mind you're not going to do it. But it is a temptation if you allow Satan that split second to slip his toe in the door and make you think about it just for a minute. So the decision is made, verse 11 and verse 12. You got to make a choice. Let's keep reading. Because in 13 and 14, what you see laid out here in this proverbial saying is the delusion of sin. You see that? We shall find, look, when we lie in wait for these people, when we completely swallow them whole, we shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, and we will have one purse. Right? Doesn't that sound great? Doesn't it sound enticing? We're going to get rich robbing these people. We're going to get rich off of the misfortune of these other people. That sounds great. But there's a delusion here. You ever heard the saying, there is no honor among thieves? Let me tell you something. There is no honor among thieves. If they all say, throwing your lot among us, we will all have one purse. Guess what? Probably not going to happen. I've seen enough Western movies to know that that doesn't work. It doesn't work out that way. Look at this passage with me in 1 Timothy chapter 6. You're familiar with it. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6. We're familiar with at least part of it. Paul, again, writing to this young man, much like this father and son relationship that you see in Proverbs chapter 1. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing with these, we shall be content. But for those who desire to be rich, fall into temptation. Isn't that what we're talking about? It might be a good footnote to write in the margin of your Bible, 1 Timothy chapter 6, 6 through 10. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, we might say an ambush, enticement, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. If they say, my son, if they say to you, throw in your lot among us, we'll all have one purse. We will fill our house with riches. Listen to me. People who fall into that category fall into the temptation. They plunge themselves through with senseless and harmful things, desiring to be rich. Then in verse 10, of course, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving, there it is, that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. No wonder in our men's study in Saturday, this rich young man, Jesus asked, go sell what you have and give to the poor. There's a delusion that accompanies far, far, far too often, a delusion that accompanies money with contentment. That's what the devil wants you to think. But here in 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul tells Timothy there is contentment in not wealth, not prosperity, not great gain. Contentment with godliness is great gain. There's a delusion. There is no honor among thieves. And with riches, there is no peace. There's no prosperity that comes with that. But look here at the last, in verses 15 through 19, you see the development of what actually happens. Because this is the reality. As he wraps up this saying to his son, this is the reality of what happens, right? He begins with, hey, don't do this. I'm instructing you to walk away from this. The decision's going to be yours, right? When they say, come with us, there's a delusion in there. But look at what happens at the end, beginning of verse 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, the development of the sin. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. If you underline in your Bible, if you mark in it at all, verse 19 deserves some special attention. It takes away the life of its possessors. What does money do? What is the way, this path of sin that we're talking about as you make a decision to go down that way? First of all, verse 18, you're walking into your own death. You're digging your own grave, is what you're doing. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. That's the reality of sin. That's where sin can get you as you see it unfold. And what you see here is that it's up to the individual, right? You see it in verse 19. These men lie in wait for their own blood, and they set an ambush for their own lives. How do you escape that? How do you escape the ambush? How do you escape the snare? Well, don't set it in the first place. And that's completely and wholeheartedly up to you. It's your decision, and it's yours to make. You remember the old TV show? Well, the devil made me. What? The devil made me do it. That might be funny, but I don't think it's going to work in heaven. The devil made me do it. These people in verse 18, they've set a snare for themselves, ambush for themselves. It's up to you to go down a different path. I think it's important as we end right here in verse 19 to go back to verse 7. Go back to the same place where we started and land back where we began. The fear of the Lord, you see it, is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Do you fear the Lord? Or will you wander down the path of sin like a fool? It's important to understand the fear of God is the beginning of everything, the beginning of life. I don't know where you stand with God. I don't know where you're at in your spiritual walk. But I do know that the good news about the path of sin is that you can always get off of it. And you can always come back to God. If you're wandering down that path and you need forgiveness, you need help or strength, whatever it is, let me encourage you to come as we stand and as we sing.